When I bring up the name Sorrel Ridge versus Smuckers, what memories come up?
I started a collaboration with a guy who was a business development guy who told me that he got us a meeting with a guy in New Jersey who runs a company called Sorrel Ridge that makes a product called Sorrel Ridge All Fruit Jam. And in 1988, which is what year it was, having an all fruit jam was a new thing. The owner of this company felt that this was an important message to get out to the people, that his product was a lot better than Smucker's for that reason. It was actually all fruit. So we had an opportunity to pitch his business. He wanted to do a TV commercial, which is pretty exciting because usually when you're freelancing, you get really crappy where you get to do a brochure or something like that.
Sure.
Rarely do you get to do a TV commercial. And I think the media that he was thinking of putting behind it, and this was in 88, was 350K. So 350K in 1988 now would probably be close to double that.
The following is a conversation with John Follis. As a Madison Avenue admin, John Follis spent the first years of his career getting fired and the next 25 years getting famous. Despite a really rough start, John co-founded a New York ad agency that became one of the most awarded ad agencies in the country. He was also selected as one of Madison Avenue's 12 best by the New York Ad Club, and John's work has helped sell everything from Coke to God, and his successful campaigns have been covered in the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, USA Today, Forbes, among many other publications. As a requested speaker and thought leader, he's addressed the World Business Academy and the Yale Entrepreneur Institute. Additionally, John is the only person to be honored at both the White House and the UN for his effective public service work. Here's our conversation. John, my man, thank you for coming on the podcast.
Hey, Daniel, happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Really excited to have you, and you're a cool dude, and I have a lot of really cool questions to get into, but speaking of, I have a quick question. How did you get fired 4 times to start your career?
Well, I can tell you for sure how I got fired 2 of those times. I got hired by someone who decided to leave the company about a month after he brought me in. And that doesn't necessarily mean I'm going to get fired, but if you know anything about the corporate environment, the guy that hires you is going to want you to be there. So if he's no longer at the company, then there's a good chance that the other people don't really want you to be there. And that was my experience, that once that guy left, that I was really looking forward to working with, and left for a better job. I understand that can happen, but it happened twice. And in both cases, it was kind of a slow death for me. I mean, I'm, one of my skill sets is not corporate politics. I realize that. And I think maybe if I was better at corporate politics and understood it better, it would have been different. But I was under the assumption that your success was mainly related to your talent. And in a corporate environment, as I discovered, that's unfortunately not always the case. It does contribute to your success, but I think a bigger piece of that puzzle to be successful is how well you can navigate the political waters in a corporate environment. So that was 2 of the other times. Another time, I made a wisecrack that got overheard by my one of the creative directors, which was not wise on my part. I have a bit of an irreverent streak that kind of hurt me in the corporate world, but I think it was one of the reasons I was so successful as an entrepreneur, being irreverent.
Got it. I mean,
the third time, the fourth time, I can't even remember.
That's the best answer, the best ending to every story. I don't really remember what happened, so I'll just leave it at that. But similar to you, I also wasn't a big fan of corporate politics, and I think once you're actually in the corporate career, there's a saying that it's not what you know, it's who you know. But I think it resonates that much more when you're actually in the job. So, really unfortunate that stuff happened sometime, but thankfully it seemed to lead you down the right path. So, we'll stay bullish on that matter. But speaking about that, you also have an article that I read that I thought was really, really interesting, titled 3 Keys to Overcoming Job Failure. So, say for example, there's a young man or young woman that approaches you right now that's going through similar troubles earlier in their career, whether they're a corporate professional or trying to do something else. What advice would you give to that person if they're going through something that you went through?
Well, you just read the article, so maybe you could remind me what what I said, because I know one of them was to develop. I think I said make connections with people that can help you. I can't remember. I said you can't do it on your own. One of the reasons I was so successful was because it wasn't only me. It was the direct result of some of the business relationships I had and was able to develop. So I think that was one of the pieces of advice I gave. Am I right?
Yeah, you're correct. Another piece of advice that you gave that I really resonated with and thought was really important was that, and something really underrated, you also wrote that don't be afraid to ask for your help for help. You never really know where it's going to come from. So I thought that was also a really interesting piece that you added, because I think a lot of people these days are scared to be vulnerable or scared to show their true personality or ask someone for help, you know?
Right.
For sure. But, really interesting note on there. But as I mentioned earlier, you're back to kind of the successful part of your advertising career. To start out early on, you actually had a professor tell you to forget about a career in advertising. And we hear of a lot of really successful stories. I think one that comes to mind is Adam Sandler, actually, where he had a professor that told him to forget about acting. And we all see how that went. But similar to your story, why do you think your professor told you to forget about a career in advertising?
Because I sent him something obscene.
Do you mind sharing what you sent him?
um, it's a long story, and that's part of it. Um, Before that even happened, my grades in the class were not good.
Hmm.
They were kind of going down the tubes. But I the simple answers. I just did not get along with the guy. I don't know
Hmm.
why. I mean, at the end of the class, we had an assignment. I did do something that was pretty offensive. I could understand that now, looking back on it, um, which didn't help my case. Um, and that was probably the tipping point. Um, I'll just say I'll try to condense the story. Um, with about 3 weeks, this was at Syracuse.
Hmm.
And Syracuse, as you may or may not know, has a great advertising program, and in large part because they somehow managed to convince a lot of people from New York City who work on Madison Avenue to come up and teach once a week. And this was one of those guys. So, we treated him like a rock star and really took what he said to us very seriously, which is why it was very frustrating to me, because prior to that, any class that I took that related to creativity or design or art, I would ace easy. I my mom was an art teacher, so I grew up being very artistic and creative. So I couldn't understand why in this first initial advertising course that was part of the curriculum that I needed to do well in order to graduate with a degree, why I was doing so poorly in it, and it was very frustrating. So with 3 weeks to go in the class, he says he's going to give an assignment that's going to be an easy A for everyone. So those stragglers, and he looks right at me when he says this. So those of you who are straggling in this class can really get an easy A and kind of uh, get a decent grade. And he said three simple requirements. It's going to be a direct mail piece, so it's got to be something that could physically be mailed to me. It's got to relate to me personally. And he said, "You guys are just too fucking conservative, and this is an assignment to get you guys to loosen up. So
Hmm.
I just want you to send something to me that relates to me, that is something I will never forget, that is so outrageous." And just it's not like you even have to sell a product. This is just an exercise to get you guys to loosen up and be wild and crazy, because you're just way too conservative.
Hmm.
So I found a so I'll just say that another little thing that may explain what I did. This guy
Mhm.
was clearly interested in flirting with all the pretty girls in the class, and with about a month to go in the
Interesting.
class, it was common knowledge that he was hooking up with one of the more sexy babes in class, because someone saw him come out of her dorm room on a Sunday morning at 8 o'clock in the morning or something like that.
They do
So
say marketing people are bold, so that's one way to prove it.
yeah, so now I know why he was motivated to fly up from New York City to teach at Syracuse. He was looking for some extracurricular activity, I think. But
Mhm.
it was common knowledge, and I think that kind of got under my skin. So because he didn't hide the fact that he was kind of flirting and he was very egocentric and all this shit. So what I sent him, Daniel, a friend of mine had a Playgirl magazine. I don't know if you even know what Playgirl magazine is, but it was like
Mhm.
the female version of Playgirl where they had naked guys in it.
Huh.
And I got the centerfold of that magazine, and one of my classmates was in a photography class and had some pictures of this instructor. So I cut out a picture of the guy's head and I stuck it on the centerfold, and I folded that up and I put it in a brown paper bag envelope. And I found a picture of a enlarged penis, and I stuck that on for just a little extra sauce. And I thought I'm going to get an A+ on this assignment because it followed everything, the 3 requirements that he dictated. And surprise, surprise, I did not get an A+ on the assignment, and so I think that
Mhm.
contributed to him telling me that I have no clue what I'm doing and I should not go into advertising. And now, looking back on it, I can understand a little bit easier why he might have said that.
One, that's a really funny story, and you've got balls for for doing what you did. So I commend you on that. But on a little more of a serious note, do you think that because you took that risk and because you did something maybe a little more outrageous than he thought you would do, that you learned more in that assignment than you would if you had, been a little more conservative?
I'm sorry, I didn't get the whole that I did what on
Oh,
that assignment?
do you think, looking back on a more serious note regarding that assignment, because you did something really extraordinary and probably out of the scope of even what your professor thought you
Right,
would
right,
do, that you
right.
learned much more about marketing than you would have if you more followed his
I
guidelines?
tell you what I learned, Daniel. I learned a very important lesson. I didn't realize that at the time. Um, but I learned that there will be points in your career, in everyone's career, where you're going to hit a roadblock. You're going to come across someone somewhere at some point that um, is not interested in helping you to succeed for whatever reason. Okay. In this case, I think it was just because I wasn't kissing his ass as well as I could have, and
Hmm.
and that was and that doesn't mean that you should give up. It just means that in with this particular person in this particular situation, um, it's not going to work out for me.
Hmm.
That was a very important lesson for me to learn, because as we talked about with my cases of being terminated at other places, um, there were many other situations where I didn't, for whatever reason, I'm not good at kissing ass. As you can tell, I've got kind of an irreverent personality. And
Same here.
if you don't figure out how to make friends or want to make friends with a guy who is in control of your success, it's not going to work out. So that's what I learned, that he was just the first of several people that um, I did not get along with, and did not, there were kind of roadblocks to my ability to succeed in that particular environment. And to finish the story about my experience at Syracuse, fortunately, they taught they had other instructors teaching the same course. It was a re- required course, so I had to take it and I had to do well in it. And I was hoping that if I took it with a different instructor, I would get a different result. And I got
Hmm.
along really well with that second instructor and got like an A- in that class.
Hmm.
So that to me was a really important lesson that I learned. It wasn't me, it was my relationship with the instructor.
For sure. I think that's something a lot of people could definitely take away a lot from, because I think a lot of times people do struggle with, standing out or making a difference in a workplace. But in reality, it's not always what you're doing, but how the work you're doing is perceived. And it's almost like you did similar work in both classes, but one professor who loved to get his ass kissed, which probably relates to a ton of other professors, but that's on another note,
Right.
versus kind of someone you got a little more along with. So it's a really interesting note on there, and glad you were able to take away a lesson there. On a slightly different note, but similar to marketing still, you were in college, not to date you, but a little bit of a while back. What's the biggest difference you've noticed in marketing now versus maybe those many years ago? I don't want to give an exact number. I don't want to age you, but back when you were kind of coming up.
Well, the basic foundational tenets of marketing have not changed. You still have to figure out how to get someone's attention and communicate quickly with the benefit of your product or service. But what has changed and will always be changing with marketing is the media. The media that
Mm-hmm.
the channels that you have of connecting with your audience. I mean, it will always be the case at one point radio didn't exist. And then when that came on, people had to say, switch gears and figure out how to use that new medium. And then TV came along, and then there was the internet. And now it's AI and chat GPT. And 20 years from now, it'll be something else. So that's what you have to continue to pay attention to, because you have to make sure that your message is also compatible with that particular media.
Mm-hmm.
What may work great on a billboard may not work well on a TV commercial, may not work in a TikTok post. Do you know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
So you have to understand the media well enough to know how to make a message that works well with that particular media.
So it's almost like learning the science of the medium, so then you know how to apply the art.
Yeah, you have to really understand the media. And, when the internet came along in the mid 90s, a lot of people who were doing traditional advertising didn't take it that seriously, didn't focus on it. Kind of like, what AI and ChatGPT is now. If I
Mm-hmm.
was still active in the business, I would be like a sponge and learn everything possible about AI and ChatGPT, because rather than be threatened by it, I would figure out how can I integrate that with my marketing.
Got it. I think that's really good advice there, and definitely something that people should focus on, because I think with the rise in AI, I think a lot of people are really worried about their jobs and the potential that, they won't be needed anymore. But I think it's great advice to tell people to figure out a way to either get really good at AI or work with AI. So one, you're still in demand in the workplace, but two, you know how to provide tangible value. So you're always going to be in demand there. So
Right.
really appreciate you sharing that advice. Speaking about the media, though, and I think you'll really like this story, actually. When I bring up the name Sorrel Ridge versus Smuckers, what memories come up?
The campaign that we did.
What about the campaign?
Well, half of your listeners are tuning out right now because they have no idea what we're talking about. They may know Smuckers, but
It's all
they
good.
won't know Sorrel Ridge, I don't think. So do you want me to explain it, or do you want to explain it?
No, go ahead. I think I've read the story, but it's better to hear from the original
Okay,
author.
so I think most people who eat peanut butter and jelly sandwiches know what Smuckers is.
Hmm.
If listener doesn't know it, it's the leading jam jelly in the United States and has been forever. I think they started probably in the late 40s or something like that.
Hmm.
So when I was in my early 30s and just freelancing, trying to win business, I started a collaboration with a guy who was a business development guy who told me that he got us a meeting with a guy in New Jersey who runs a company called Sorrel Ridge that makes a product called Sorrel Ridge All Fruit Jam. And in 1988, which is what year it was, having an all fruit jam was a new thing.
Mm-hmm.
Because here's a little tutorial on jam. In case you don't know, most jam is like 90% corn syrup. So if you're 90% corn syrup
Yep.
and 8% refined sugar, or and 3% fruit, you can't call yourself all fruit. You can call yourself jam and jelly, surprisingly enough. But most jam and jelly, an average jar of Smuckers, they only have 8% fruit, which is amazing to me. So didn't
Mm-hmm.
know this back in '88, and the owner of this company felt that this was an important message to get out to the people, that his product was a lot better than Smucker's for that reason. It was actually all fruit. So
Mm-hmm.
we had an opportunity to pitch his business. He wanted to do a TV commercial, which is pretty exciting because usually when you're freelancing, you get really crappy where you get to do a brochure or something like that.
Sure.
It's rarely do you get to do a TV commercial. And I think the media that he was thinking of putting behind it, and this was in '88, was 350K. So 350K in 1988 now would probably be close to double that, right?
Yep.
So
Not more.
that was a real exciting opportunity. But we were also pitching against, I think, 4 other real agencies. We were 2 guys working out of our apartments in New York. Anyway, we came up with a commercial that surprisingly beat out all the other agencies, and it enabled us to basically start our agency because of the revenue that we were getting. We were also, my partner had experience as a media buyer and planner. So
Mm-hmm.
he was able, one of the other things he was able to do for this client was plan and help buy the media, which then enables us to get 15% of what the client is spending. So whatever the 15% of 350K was. So that enabled us to start our agency. And more than that, the commercial turned out to be an amazing success.
It was a great commercial. From even seeing it today, I watched it a little before we were on air. I thought it was really simple and kind of funny. So kudos for the creativity way back when. But as a result of the commercial, you were actually featured in a lot of publications, and as you mentioned, it kind of put you on the map. When you saw a picture of yourself in the New York Post, what went through your head?
This is cool.
Got it. Were you like surprised, or you were like, it's just
You know,
they wrote about me in the newspaper?
yeah, I was surprised because my partner was. I'm not a New York City guy. I'm from Connecticut, so I'm kind of more of a laid back, not the street smart guy that my partner was, but he was really scrappy and street smart, very aggressive. And when he decided he wanted to do something, he just he was willing to do anything. I mean, that was great having him as a partner because he was able to get meetings and open doors. And one of the other things he was great at, in addition to getting meetings with prospective clients, was getting on the radar of the press. So
Hmm.
I think he would just he was not shy about calling them up and giving them a story and knowing what to say in the first 30 seconds of a conversation to get them excited. You know what I'm saying?
Hmm.
So he's very savvy about that. And all I know is that he just said, "Hey, John, next Tuesday we're meeting, or we're getting our picture taken." Now I don't, something. I didn't even talk to the reporter at the Post. He did.
Hmm.
He was a bit of a control freak. So
Sure.
he just said, "Hey, John, we need a photograph to send the New York Post. We're going to be in the Post on next week." And I said, "On what?" And he said, "Well, I talked about our agency and our campaign and whatever, and we just need to send him a photo." So my job was to, get the photo. I knew some photographers. They had some headshots taken, so we had a nice shot of ourselves. Just sent that to the Post, and that's what they printed when they wrote the article. But I was not even aware of the conversation that he had. And it kind of pissed me off a lot of the time because the stories was really about both of us,
Hmm.
but he had a habit of kind of hogging the limelight and controlling the narrative, which kind of pissed me off, and eventually was one of the reasons I decided to get a divorce.
Hmm. Got it. Interesting that you guys ended up splitting ways from that. But to backtrack a bit, I think it's really interesting that the way you got in the newspaper was almost the opposite of what a lot of other people think. I think a lot of people have this perception of media. They're always looking for the next best story. And while they are, I think it's underrated that a lot of the times it's people reaching out to the media and pitching them a good story to tell. So definitely a note to anyone really trying to get their notes out there. But cool to see how your story unfolded, and sorry that you had to go through that experience. But ultimately, moving forward a little bit, that's ultimately what put you guys on the map, got you guys in the newspaper, really probably opened up the big client funnel for you guys. I'm sure you've gotten a chance to work with a lot of really cool and interesting clients, but thus far, what would you say has been your craziest client story?
Hmm. Well, I guess it was the one that got me invited to the White House.
So what was that story?
Um, it's not so much a crazy client story; it's just a crazy advertising career story. There's really nothing crazy about the client. The client in this case was the NBA. The NBA
It's a notable client.
and it was kind of a dual client because the NBA was sponsoring the ad, but
Mhm.
the organization was a child abuse prevention organization out of Chicago,
Mhm.
the National Committee for the Prevention of Child Abuse. So they were able to broker a deal with many, as you may know, many of the major sports leagues run a lot of public service stuff because they think it's good business
Mhm.
to tag their league logo on a message that's stay in school or whatever it is, right?
Positive stuff.
Right. It's just good business for public relations. So um, the NBA was doing this. We did this for them in 1991, but they had been doing that for years prior to that. Um, so the message was for child abuse prevention, but the we were also working with the NBA because it was their logo as well that was going. They were sponsoring the thing, and it was run. The commercial was run during the playoffs, the NBA playoffs that year, which was pretty cool. Got exposed
Mhm.
over the 5 or 6 weeks of the playoffs to I think 28 million people. So the majority of the work that I didn't get seen, was local or regional. So this was without question work that I the work that I did that got exposed to more people, and because it was so successful, it somehow got on the radar of the White House, and I still don't know exactly how. I think it had to be that the president was watching basketball. That's all I could figure out, because this was again years ago when George Bush was president, and Barbara Bush was one of her passion projects was child abuse prevention.
Mhm.
And I think when George happened to see these child abuse prevention spots running on basketball, he probably said, "Hey, Barbara, you got to check out these commercials or whatever," because they were really saturated during the NBA playoffs. They would run like uh, 8 or 10 times for each playoff game, so you could not miss
Big
them.
audience. Yep.
Yeah, um, and all I know is that about a month after the playoffs, I got a letter in the mail with the White House as a return address, and I thought it was a joke. I mean, who gets a letter from the White House, right? And it was a invitation to a reception where my partner and I, along with another dozen people from across the country who were involved in various nonprofit uh, initiatives were invited to be part of a reception where they were being honored. So that was pretty crazy to get that invitation. So less about the client and just more about, what happened as a result. And it all started with an ad that I did that included Adolf Hitler.
That's kind of wild to think that was what got
Which
you
is a whole
invited to
nother
the.
story, but I found out that Hitler was abused as a kid. And
Mhm.
that so this whole thing started, we would have never even gotten this assignment and done these commercials if it wasn't the direct result of me sitting home in front of my TV one evening watching a PBS special on Adolf Hitler, which mentioned that he was abused as a kid.
Mhm.
And that sparked an idea that led to one thing to another. And eventually we got this meeting with the child abuse people who just coincidentally happened to be coming to New York and meeting with the NBA people. So it was a series of just crazy, lucky events and good timing that we found ourselves getting this opportunity to do this TV campaign.
It's crazy how somehow these nefarious resources and these, bad figures end up leading to, these resounding other stories. So really, really cool how those events ended up working out. But just curious, when you went to the White House, what was that experience like? Were there levels of security you had to get through? I mean, I imagine that was probably insane.
Yeah, I mean, it was, gosh, 40 years ago at this point, I think, 91,
Mhm.
35. So, yeah, you go through a series of checkpoints, I think. I don't even remember, but it was just like, high security.
Got
Um,
it.
and then you're in this big room and they're passing around hors d'oeuvres and sodas and things like that. And you're with a bunch of other people. And then Barbara Bush comes out and, makes a big announcement, makes a little speech. And then you get in a line to get your photo op. So you get in this long line. There's a photographer there. You pose, she pats you on the back and kind of moves you along so the next person could, get the photo op.
That's an interesting vibe. When you went to the White House, did it meet your expectations or was it really underwhelming just to be there?
I thought it was great. I mean, I don't know if I'd even been to Washington D.C. At that point.
Mhm.
So no, it was a thrill. It had to be probably the biggest thrill of my career. But I should also mention, Daniel, and I don't know if you know this, but the ad that I had originally come up with that included Hitler got rejected.
Mhm.
We were meeting with the child abuse people basically to show them this print ad that I'd come up with that they thought was way too much using Hitler in an ad, right? Which is when they switched gears and said, we're not going to do that, but we need some TV commercials. Well, maybe you'd be interested in helping us do that. So
Mhm.
that's what happened. But this ad that I had come up with originally, my partner, who is Jewish, by the way, thought it was a brilliant ad. And we were able to get another child abuse organization in Albany, New York, to run it in the newspaper. And because it ran, then we could enter it in the award shows.
Mhm.
And later that year, after we got invited to the White House, I got another letter, this time from the United Nations, saying,
Oh boy.
just want to let you know that your public service ad for child abuse prevention, we've just awarded it the first ever United Nations Public Service Award because we feel it embodies the mission of the United Nations to make the world a better place. So we'd like to invite you to the United Nations to pick up your United Nations Public Service Award. So there I went about 3 or 4 months after the White House, got on my bicycle, rode to the United Nations for another photo op and to receive my award. So it was a good year that year.
Got it. Got it. Sounds like you had a lot of professional photos taken that year, but nice that you got a chance to speak at the White House and the UN. And it's incredible to see
Did not
how.
speak at the White House. Just got a
Oh,
photo op at the
my
White
bad.
House. Yeah.
Close enough. But I think a lot of
Barbara
people
Bush spoke at the White House.
got it. I mean, Barbara, you, two big public figures, tomato, tomato, but really cool to see that you got that opportunity. And I think it's interesting because a lot of people really probably try to go for that stuff, or maybe the equivalent of, say today's Forbes 30 under 30, where a lot of people kill themselves to get this, noticed, when realistically you're just kind of doing your job and it got noticed. And I think a lot of people, placed an overemphasis on the results and stuff getting noticed, when realistically that stuff is important, but you should focus on doing a great job. And if you can do a great job and improve little by little, all that stuff should come one way or the other. So really cool that you got a chance to do that story. But back to some of the marketing stuff that you were doing, as you're running this firm and as you're getting noticed by the White House and the UN, just curious, were you ever worried about competition, or were you just focused on being the best that you could be?
Um, Kind of both. I don't think it was either or. We had a lot of competition. There were a lot of hot, we were kind of known as the hot young guys on Madison Avenue because we were both, I think, 33 or 34 when we started our agency, and right off the bat, we kind of hit the ground running with that very first Sorrel Ridge campaign that was like a grand slam. So we were getting write-ups in the advertising trade magazines from the very get-go of our first account win. And it continued because we continued doing great work. But there were 2 or 3 other agencies, smaller other creative agencies, that were similar to ours in that they were run by young guys who were doing kind of edgy creative work that was getting attention. So, some of these guys I was actually had a personal relationship with. I knew them. I had actually worked with a couple of them who were our competition. But that to me was just, I think in any industry you're going to have competition, and we just focused on doing the best job we could. I got a little bit annoyed. Another thing I got annoyed about with my partner, because we had an opportunity to get a big interview in New York Magazine. I don't know if New York Magazine is even around anymore, but at the time it was like the big magazine in New York, and they were going to do a feature article on us. And my partner came to me prior to the interview to kind of prep me, because he was always the one that had that initial conversation with the reporter. And this time I was going to be involved in the interview. And he said, John, they're going to ask us about our competition. And when they do that, we have to trash them. We have to tell them they suck and we're so much better. And I said, whoa, 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 whoa. I'm not going to say that they suck and we're better. I said, I don't think that's a smart thing to say, to, go on record as saying that they suck and we're great. I said, no, you don't get it. We have to trash them. We have to tell them, say they suck. This is a big opportunity. We have to get people to, if we don't believe in ourselves that we're great and we're better than the competition, no one is going to. And I just had a different philosophy. I just think it's no different than when you're being interviewed, you're going to play in the Super Bowl, and you're a player and they ask you about your competition. You don't want to say they suck and you're going to beat them and you're better. I think you have to show a respect for your partner. It doesn't mean that you don't have confidence that you think you're going to win the game, but you don't want to put anyone down. So to answer your question, yes, we were always aware of our competition, but my philosophy was you just try to prove why you're better by the work that you do.
Got it. It's a fair point there. And maybe a note for Patrick Mahomes and Brock Purdy over these next 2 weeks, as just so happens to be that the big game is coming up. But I agree in the sense that, it's something you have to be aware of. But I think ultimately, when you're really boiling it down to the crux of it, everyone's just trying to add value. And whether it's you or, ideally you, but your competitor, you have to put some level of respect there.
I should also just interject here. The press is often looking for a soundbite. It's tricky sometimes talking to the press. This, again, is just some coaching with the press. Not in every case, but I would say in many cases, the person asking the questions will ask a question that's kind of a leading question
pointed
that will get you in trouble if you're not careful in how you answer it. I mean, you if you watch any of the political shows, you know what I'm talking about.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to have some, I think, training when it comes to PR in knowing how to ask questions, because some of the questions we would get is, okay, well, if you're not better than your competition or whatever, how are you different than your competition?
Mm-hmm.
So we needed to be prepared to answer questions like that, which are sometimes not easy to answer, but it does require some thought before you open your mouth, because if you don't think about what you're saying and aren't fully prepared to answer it the right way, you can't take it back. Once it's come out of your mouth, it's going in print and going to be seen by tens of thousands of people. So it's really important to be prepared whenever you're interviewed.
Written in ink for sure. And, to bring up an example that I think really illustrates that. So Bill Belichick, now it seems crazy to say the former coach of the New England Patriots, he's historically, well, actually a lot of great coaches have historically been very unfavoring of the media, not really liking to talk to them, or, thinking they're kind of a waste of time. But there's actually a report that came out, or someone made a video one time about Bill Belichick, and when reporters ask very pointed questions, he's always like, on to the next one, blah, blah, a really curt type of answer. But when someone asks him something about football, or kind of a really interesting question, something that, is a legitimate question towards his knowledge base, he really extrapolates and gives a long answer. So I think, just to add on to your point, I think definitely from the PR end, if you're a reporter asking these questions, know how to ask questions that are interesting, but aren't just looking for some kind of forced narrative out there. So really interesting point that you bring up there. But speaking of kind of that PR stuff and marketing, I forget if I asked this earlier, but I have to ask, do you think marketing is more art or science?
Um, I'm glad you brought that up, because it's not it's a combination of both.
Mm-hmm.
And I think too many people who are not great at marketing err by being too much on the science side, with the analytics and the technical stuff,
Mm-hmm.
or they err on the other side, too much on the creative stuff and don't factor in the other side of it. So it's a really important mix. I'd say it's almost 50-50
Mm-hmm.
of the two to be successful. You really have to understand both sides of that coin to be successful.
It's really interesting that you mentioned that it's 50-50, because I was almost getting ready to ask you, is it one more than the other? But always interesting to hear about the mixture of art and science, especially, within something like marketing, because I think life is a little more art than science, a little more intuition based. But I think that you have to, and it's a little funny because we were just talking off air about this, but you almost have to kind of apply yourself and do practical things, which is more the science step before the art really kicks in. So always really fascinating thing around that. But to get into a little more specific around marketing and just life in general, a big part of it isn't necessarily or isn't necessarily the facts or what happens. And while you have to be truthful, a lot of it is being able to captivate an audience and really be great at storytelling. So how would you advise someone to become a great storyteller?
Hmm. Boy, I don't know. I suppose it's something you can be taught. I think some people are just naturally good at it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, um, I think people who are good storytellers are usually people who like reading and listening to stories,
Mm-hmm.
and they make that they spent a lot of time um, over a period of years and years, watching movies, listening to good stories, reading books with good stories, listening to people tell stories. And I think the more you digest great stories from great storytellers, I think that can help your ability to tell stories. Um, so I would say that would be one thing. uh, to be a student
Hmm.
of good stories and good storytellers, and hope that by listening to and observing them and digesting them, that maybe some of that storytelling talent and ability can rub off on you. But I think it also helps when you have a story that you really are excited about telling, right?
Hmm.
You can't be a great storyteller if you don't give a damn about what it is you're talking about. So I think a lot of it comes out of um, personal passion about telling the story. I've got some. I always get excited when people ask me some of the questions you're asking me, because like the White House and things like that, because it's a fun story to talk about. It's a fun story. Now it's fun talking about that crazy thing that I sent my professor at Syracuse.
Hmm.
It wasn't so fun at the time when he pulled me aside and said, "You suck at advertising. You should not go into advertising." But now it makes a fun story to tell.
For sure. That's how I like to think about every bad thing that happens, or well, maybe not the most terrible things, but everything that isn't convenient. This will make for a really good story one day. So
Right.
that is a silver lining there. But I appreciate you sharing kind of notes about storytelling. But storytelling is really important in marketing. And speaking of marketing, what do you think today is something that a lot of executives get wrong in regards to marketing?
Um, I think they err too much on the technical and analytical side.
Hmm.
Um, they don't realize that it's not just about getting information out there about your product or service. That if your message doesn't quickly uh, engage someone and touch someone on an emotional level,
Hmm.
that's where the creativity comes in. A great creative message will get your viewer or audience to feel something inside.
Hmm.
Um, I think studies have shown that uh, most buying decisions, are made because people respond to them on an emotional level. Not maybe it's a combination of the two. It doesn't mean it excludes the intellectual level, but the tipping point to them taking action usually is based on an emotional reaction. And I think most
Hmm.
advertisers and marketers, I think, don't realize the importance of how the creative can help make that happen. Does that make sense?
Hmm. Got it. Yep, that makes perfect sense. And I appreciate you sharing that. And hopefully, a lot of marketing executives can listen to that and focus in a little more on the emotional end. Because I think we live in an era, as you mentioned earlier, with a lot of AI and a lot of this analytic stuff coming up, people forget that you're trying to invoke an emotion in someone. So, really love that you brought that up.
And
Back
also,
to a little bit about your career.
I
Sure.
also should say, a great creative idea will make your message stand out from anything else. You know what I'm saying?
Hmm.
I mean,
That's how people are different.
I can bet that instructor, that college instructor that told me not to go into advertising, still remembers that that thing that I sent him. Right?
Mhm.
I'm sure that he still remembers it, and so you have to do something that will stand out, get people to remember it, but it's got to be memorable and stand out in the right way. In my case with that instructor, perhaps it was not the right way to stand out. But
Mhm.
again, to kind of defend myself, he said, "You're not selling any product. All
Well,
I
at
want you
least.
to do is
Mhm.
loosen up and be outrageous." And I thought I did that.
Well, at least you got one of the two. So, progress is better than perfection for sure. But appreciate you sharing some of that advice. And I think a lot of people, try to think about how to be different and they try a little too hard on the wrong things. I'm certainly no marketing executive, but I think some good advice that I've looked at recently is to see what the top people are doing, maybe benchmark that. And then once you understand what they're doing, to iterate upon that. So, really interesting note on there. But back to a little bit about your career. You've had a really long, and extensive and really successful career in marketing and have been fortunate enough, as you mentioned, to be at the White House and accept an award at the UN and get some great photo opportunities. But If you were talking to your 20-year-old self who's just starting in marketing, maybe you could tell him that, hey, these next few jobs aren't going to work out. What's something you would have told him?
I would probably say that what I eventually realized over time was that corporate politics are a very key aspect of being a success in a corporate environment. And if you want to be successful in that corporate environment, it's not going to be only based on your talent.
Hmm.
You have to uh, really reckon with the fact that this is a part of life
Hmm.
and your ability to succeed in a corporate environment. And I don't think I realized that when I was 20 because there weren't any courses at Syracuse entitled corporate politics. There should be. I mean, I think that would be a great thing to teach at all universities because um, if you do get a job in the corporate world, it's unavoidable. And I don't know that many people are really prepared. Especially, listen, New York City and the ad business, that combination of that industry and that city, um, I think makes that about as intense a thing to deal with
Hmm.
as possible. Corporate politics. It may be less intense in Boise, Idaho, or some other small town, but you're always going to have any kind of an environment that's a business environment. You're going to have personalities to deal with. Is going to be an aspect of corporate politics, and that's something that I think I wish I was better at it. I wish I kind of knew a little bit more than I did about how to deal with that. So that's what I would have told myself.
I agree with you in that sense, but a bold prediction here, as much as it should be taught in every university, I unfortunately don't think it is, for the wrong reasons, and that's because it's the same thing as the guy that basically founded what CTE is to football. It would be basically it would basically be pulling the bag over what working in corporate America really is. When a lot of colleges try to advertise it as, the harder you work and, the further you're going to get ahead. And while there is certainly a lot of work that goes into it, I don't think I don't think professors really want to pull up the curtain, because I think I think it'll expose a lot of really how the system works. And, I'll try to keep it as people that the system works for really won't take it well when you're kind of calling their baby ugly or giving their baby a name. So an interesting note on there, definitely something we all have to get really good at and, know how to manage relationships. But it will be interesting to see the dynamic around if that relationship building course, we'll call it that, is in colleges in the future. So
Yeah.
appreciate you sharing thoughts on there. On a more personal note, is there one person, dead or alive, that you'd love to get dinner with?
Sure. If there was such a person as Jesus Christ, I mean, I'd like to meet the guy. I don't know if he really existed, but
Mhm.
if he did, I think I because there's a lot of people seem to be pretty enamored with him.
Mhm.
So I'd like to find out what all the fuss is about.
Got it. That's a fair answer there. I love that. If you weren't a legendary marketer or didn't work in marketing, what else would you be?
Um, well, my fantasy was to be a rock star.
You look like one, so that's a good, that's a good sign.
Well, I'm working on it now. I don't know if I'd look like one. But I'd look like an aging rock star, maybe.
Mhm.
But I've been playing guitar since I was 13,
Mhm.
and I'm kind of making up for lost time now because I was always very focused on my career, so I never had time to like try to pursue being in a rock band. But
Mhm.
I'm kind of doing that now. I'm working on my guitar playing chops and singing abilities and jamming with a guy once a week. And so I don't know if I would seriously pursue being a rock star when I was in college, but I'm sure it would be something. It's kind of funny you asked this question because even after I transferred to Syracuse, I did not know that I was going to pursue advertising. I was talking to a guy that I thought was a career counselor for advice because Syracuse had a cornucopia of careers that involved some kind of creativity, whether it was fashion design or um, architecture or photography or broadcasting or anything that was in the media, communication, arts. So I was hoping that this guy I was going to be speaking to would kind of sit down with me and have a conversation, and so I could give some thought as to what courses I was going to take and explore. Um, and he took my course card and he said, let me see this, and he took a few minutes, he filled it out and he handed it back to me, and everything on the course card was related to advertising. And I said, well, wait a second. I don't know that I want to go into advertising. I said, I thought we were going to have a conversation about this. And he said, kid, if you have creative talent and you want to make money, you go into advertising. Now take this card to the woman over there and she'll set you up. And that's how I got into advertising. And I went over to the woman. I said, who is that guy? And she goes, oh, that's John Sellers, the chairman of the advertising department. So, yeah. So I think had that not happened, I might have taken some courses in architecture or explored photography or maybe filmmaking. I love making films now. I made a documentary a few years ago. I think I might have kind of, explored some other things, but I was kind of running out of time at that point, Daniel. I was, that was my junior year, and I had to declare at that point a major, and that's how it turned out to be advertising. And as I said, really? I didn't have a very auspicious beginning to it with that first instructor.
Well, maybe it was destiny, and maybe he learned more from that first instructor than really set out. But really appreciate you sharing that. On a parting note here, you've had, as I've mentioned, before, gotten a chance to do a lot of really cool work. Really a creative genius, and have loved having you. But if you could summarize your legacy in one sentence, what would that sentence be?
Gosh, these are tough questions, Daniel.
Yeah, you don't build the best podcast in the world by asking shitty questions, John.
Okay, there you go. Okay, gosh, if I could, what did you say? If I could leave my legacy?
If you could summarize what you want your legacy to be in one sentence, what would it
be? He made the world a better place. Helped make the world a better place.
I think that's a very fair legacy and a great answer. And John, it's been an absolute blast, and really appreciate you taking the time.
My pleasure, Daniel. Great talking to you, and thanks for the questions. You really asked some good, thought-provoking questions, so I appreciate that.
Thank you for listening to my conversation with John Follis. If you enjoyed the episode, rate the show on Spotify, drop a comment on YouTube, and subscribe.